Of all the things that salmon do, the thing they're most known for is their ability to jump. In fact, the word salmon is derived from a Latin word, salmon, which most likely means leaper. So the best people can tell from the word salmon is that it came from the whole idea of this fish that does this amazing thing jumping out of the water. The Atlantic salmon actually holds the world's record for the highest jump that a salmon has ever taken, that anybody's ever recorded. 12 feet. So if I put my hands up, right there is 8. So go 4 more, and that fish says, "Thank you very much, I can do that," and just jumps right over. I was watching on television, the news last night, the state track and field championships, and the pole vault winner did 11 feet. They jump, of course, to overcome obstacles that would otherwise mark the end of their journey. Where other fish have to simply turn around because they've come to this ledge or this cliff or these rapids that's blocking their way, the salmon blast right out of the water and clear the rapids. Scientists tell us that they actually use the force of the rapids to jump the rapids. Now think about that, because this is what we're going to be talking about when it comes to your journey, your upstream journey, when you hit the biggest obstacles. They actually use the force of the water. How do they do that? Well, the water comes over the cliff, over the ledge, and tumbles down into a pool. Now when it gets there, there's more water piling up in the pool than can get out of the pool right away. And so the water churns around down there and creates a kind of hump in the water, which scientists call a hydraulic pump. And so there's not only water coming down, but there's water pushing back up. And the salmon dives way down deep in the pool. It finds that upsurging current, says thank you very much, gives a big swish of its tail, and rides the energy of the waterfall to conquer the waterfall. In our upstream journey to follow Jesus and fulfill God's purpose for our lives, we will encounter and do encounter obstacles like the waterfall that blocks the salmon's way. These are not obstacles that you can just simply swim against. Notice, salmon don't swim up the stream, up the waterfall. There's too much force, too much water coming. It would wash everything away, and not even the salmon, in fact, no fish can simply swim against that strong current. And the same is true in your life and my life. We hit obstacles that are too big for us. It's okay to acknowledge that. We don't have to come up with some kooky idea of, well, if I have a little bit more faith, or a little bit more this, or if I were a better person, or if I just studied more, or worked more, or paid more, or whatever, that I could overcome this. Frankly, you'll hit things that you can't overcome, period. But God can use His strength to help you overcome them through His mighty power. And a lot of times that means using what seems like negative energy and negative circumstances that are pushing against us, and finding God's way to turn that energy around to give us the bump and the push that we need. God's Spirit will show us how to make the obstacle itself provide a way to overcome it. Think back to the story of Joseph, sold into slavery by his brothers, written off for dead for years. And when they finally meet him years later, after all of his misadventures, of being accused of a crime he didn't commit, being left in jail for years and years, and then finally being raised up by God's power to the second most highest place in the land, when his brothers come face to face with him, they're looking at a man who overcame amazing obstacles. Not because he was so strong or because he had all the connections, but because he let God carry him through that. And they cringe in front of Joseph and go, "Oh, don't kill us now. You must be really mad." And he says, "No, I'm not. You intended this for evil, but God intended it for good." You see, Joseph found a way to take the obstacle and find God's path over it. Now, Paul's upstream journey to bring the good news of Jesus' resurrection to the world of his time brought him face to face with the raging rapids of paganism in the place that represented the very heart of pagan religion and pagan philosophy. And that place was the city of Athens, Greece. Athens was the the supreme capital of the Greek world in terms of all Greek thought and philosophy and art and so on. Its most famous landmark is, of course, the Acropolis, collection of ancient temples, including the Parthenon that sit on top of a hill overlooking the city. We connect Athens with that Acropolis to this day. Paul walked through the streets of Athens and looked up at those same buildings 2,000 years ago. And as he walked through that city, Luke tells us he was incensed, deeply, deeply troubled, just absolutely turned inside out over the sheer number of idols in that city. One ancient writer has said, quote, "Athens is a veritable forest of idols." Not just one or two here and there, but as thick as trees all through the city. Clearly, Paul had his work cut out for him. Luke tells us that he spent his days in the agora, or the market, at the foot of the Acropolis, making the case for King Jesus. And it wasn't long before he ran into the waterfall of paganism. In the course of these conversations, he found himself debating with these Athenian philosophers. We read in Acts 17:18, a group of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, those are the two leading schools of philosophy of the time, a group of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." And they said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. The Athenians were used to the idea that there are many gods. And when they heard Paul talking about Jesus and resurrection, they did something Paul never intended. They thought he was simply talking about two new gods to add to the list, one named Jesus and one named resurrection. What's another two gods, you might say? When you already have hundreds of them, oh, well, here's a guy with a whole new thing, a Jesus God and a resurrection God. Paul's going to have to find a way to jump the waterfall of the pagan world if he's going to succeed in telling God's story, because already the story's off the rails. Now, there was something else going on, however, in this thing of saying he is advocating or teaching about new or strange gods. Everybody at that time knew the story, especially in Athens, but across the whole world there, of a man named Socrates. He was the granddaddy of Greek philosophy. He was the teacher of Plato. Andrew talked to you about him last week, about that metaphor of the cave. And Socrates was the towering figure behind much of Greek philosophy and basically much of Western thought. Socrates, as you probably know, had come to an untimely end after being tried and convicted in Athens by the Supreme Court of Athens for introducing new and strange gods. That was part of one of the major reasons why he was condemned. He was charged for advocating for new and strange gods. Now Luke tells us that Paul is being accused of the very same thing. He's talking about new and strange gods, new teachings and strange gods. And this didn't just mean that people were curious and said, "Oh, well, that's interesting." They were suspicious. They wondered what that would mean, because while they had lots of gods, they were very protective of the lots of gods that they had. And it was actually a capital crime. You could be put to death, as was Socrates, for bringing in new gods and disrupting that system. And so the debate results in Paul actually being arrested and taken to court. Now, the name of the court was Areopagus, named after the hill. It's still present in the city of Athens, where this court met. The hill of Areus, basically. Pagos means hill. And so Paul was taken to this court. And we read in chapter 17, verse 19, they seized him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, the court, where they said to him, and this is an amended translation from what you might have in your Bible, because this is a way that we can better understand the actual words. "We have a right to know what this new teaching is that you're presenting." This appearance before this Areopagus court has often been portrayed as a polite philosophical conversation. And one of the ways that this has been understood by scholars and readers has been to think, well, here's Paul bringing the gospel, and here's this pagan world that never heard about Jesus, and they're having this friendly conversation. That was not what was going on there. Paul was essentially standing on trial for his life because he was being thought of as bringing in these two new strange gods, Jesus and resurrection, and trying to upend the Greek pagan system. Some waterfall. Not only is there a misunderstanding, but just as has been the case in the last two cities we look at, Paul finds his life on the line. Remember, in Lystra, he was stoned and left for dead because he raised a man from the dead and refused to accept worship for that. Remember what you heard last week, he went to Philippi and cast a divining spirit out of a little girl and was beaten and thrown into prison, and who knows how that would have ended had God not set him free. And now here we are in his third encounter in the book of Acts with the authorities, and again, he is standing where Socrates stood, being charged with a very similar crime, and now finds that not only does he have to share the good news in a way that can get through to people, but he might be also fighting for his life as well. Remember that salmon jumping the waterfall. It can't swim over the falls. The force of the water is too strong. But as that water tumbles into the pool at the base of the falls, it mounds up and forms that hydraulic pump. The salmon swims down, finds that surge of rising water, and lets the waterfall's own water help launch it over the falls. Now, Paul chooses to do exactly the same thing when faced with this impenetrable waterfall of entrenched paganism. He wasn't going to argue anybody out of anything. He wasn't going to be able to prove to them that this god or that one or the next one was bogus. They had the whole system running and they were in charge. So instead of fighting back, Paul did what the salmon does. He dove down into the bottom of the pool. He dove into their belief system. He found a place of common ground, and then he launched his own bigger story, the story of the world's creator and the world's redeemer. So Paul began in this way. He connected his message with their own religious behavior. Acts 17, 22 and 23. Now here he is. He's on trial. Here's this Areopagus, this court, has the power over every facet of life in the city of Athens. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship." Your own words. "And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." You see, Paul used the pagan system's own words, "to an unknown God," as the way to begin to launch his story. How could they protest when they themselves had professed their own ignorance? See, he's not coming against them. He's not there ranting and raving and screaming and yelling at them. He's joining forces with them, walking their path with them, swimming in their river. But he's sure going in a different direction. Paul then introduces the identity of the unknown God as the one true God who created the world. He goes on to say in verse 24 and 25, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he gives everyone life and breath and everything else." There it is. That bright line between creator and creation, between God and humans. Paul's saying, this is no new or strange God. If you want to put an age on this God, he's got to be older than everybody else, because he created everything. He's not a Johnny-come-lately. He's not something that somebody cooked up in a little religious fantasy 2 weeks ago. He's the God that's before time. If you want to talk about new gods, your gods are the new ones. He's the old God, the one God, the timeless God. This is the God who came before it all. Then Paul embeds human beings within God's creation. To do this, he quotes pagan philosophers. Again, he's not fighting them. He's using their thoughts and their words, but pointing them in a totally different direction. Now, he quotes philosophers, he quotes a few things we'll read in a moment that were very well known. They were practically platitudes of the day. Acts 17, verse 26 to 28. From one man he made all nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. In other words, we're all in this together. No difference between me and you. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. In other words, you people living in Greece, God meant for you to be there, just as he meant for other people to be where they are. This is all part of God's plan. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. And now here comes a quote from a pagan philosopher. For in him we live and move and have our being. That sentiment was totally consistent with those Stoic philosophers who believed that God couldn't be necessarily stuck in a temple or have a statue made of him, but was much more powerful than that and was actually present inside of us. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Direct quote from a particular pagan poet. This is common ground. So far, the people in the court are going, nothing wrong with that. Hey, we believe the same thing. He may have a different haircut. He may have a different vocabulary, but we're all on the same page here. Christians, Jews, pagans would all understand what Paul was saying. But Paul is cleverly refuting the notion that humans can define God. He is the creator. He alone does the defining. We are made in his image. God is not made in our image. What was that forest of idols all about? Well, it was all about people trying to imagine what God, or what the gods, bits and pieces of God, if you will, might possibly look like. And so they would come up with things that would be appealing to us, things that would represent power to us or beauty to us, create statues and religious systems and so on. But these were all projections out of a human mind. Another way of putting it is these were all gods in man's image. Paul says, I'll swim in your river. I'll even swim underneath your waterfall, but I'm going the other way. It's not God in man's image. It's man and woman in God's image. There you can see the salmon streaking upwards through the deep waters of the pool. Now it's time to launch itself over the falls. One of Paul's favorite words is the little word now. Let's say it. Now. Yeah. Haha. Now shouts out the news that things have changed. In fact, in the Greek of this passage, it says, but now. What does that say to you? Things are going along. There was a time when things were a certain way, but now, whoa, now everything is different. And Paul says, yes, there was certainly a time when we didn't even know what we didn't know. A time of ignorance, groping for God, trying to figure things out, putting up an altar that says, to an unknown God. Yes, that's reality. Think about your own life. There were times in your life when you didn't know what you didn't know. And maybe there were times when you did know that you didn't know something and you're going, I just don't know how to go forward with this. And you're going along through life and then all of a sudden, but now. 1971, I graduated from college. Driving back from Lake George, New York, we decided to take the long way, went through northern New Hampshire. I don't know whether by myself or with another friend or whatever. And we came across Route 2 and drove through Lancaster, New Hampshire, because it was just on the way to go back through the White Mountains and end up in Portland, Maine. Just a nice drive through northern New England. I didn't live up here. I had maybe been up here once in my life, maybe not. And as I was driving through Lancaster, and I'm 21 years old, and I'm thinking, boy, someday I really hope I get married and I meet a nice girl, the whole thing. I got this whole thing. But there's nothing on the horizon. I mean, absolutely nada. And I'm driving into Lancaster, New Hampshire, and I get to where you have to make a right-hand turn to get on what is also Route 3, go down Main Street, and as I'm getting ready to turn the corner, I have the weirdest thought I've ever had in my life. And it went like this, almost audible. What would it be like to marry a girl from Lancaster, New Hampshire? wonder if she'd be blonde, brunette, redhead. I wonder what kind of girl she'd be. Well, that'd be, yeah. Wouldn't it be weird if there was a girl in this town that... 2 years later, I finally caught up with this beautiful young lady in Durham, New Hampshire, Dover, New Hampshire, at the First Baptist Church of Dover Baptist Church. Been trying to find a way to even meet her for, 3 or 4 weeks. We have a little chat, and I say, and where are you from? Lancaster, New Hampshire. This is the honest goodness truth. I believe in the word of knowledge. I believe God speaks to us. Because there was a time when I didn't know what I didn't know. And the Holy Spirit said, let's have some fun with him. Because one day he's going to meet the person he's going to spend his whole life with. And when he does, we're going to blow him away. That poor Suzanne, she didn't know when she said Lancaster. She doomed herself. That was it. I never met anybody else from Lancaster, New Hampshire. I never even met any, how many women did I meet from Lancaster, New Hampshire? One. How many did I need to? One. That's the power of now. You're going along, and then all of a sudden God breaks into your life, and we're going somewhere else. And that's what Paul does. As he set this up, he's connected with these pagans, and they're taking this journey, and all of a sudden he says, but now. Listen to how he does it. Chapter 17, verse 30. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance. But now, he commands all people everywhere to repent, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof to this to everyone by raising him from the dead. In a flash, Paul has just jumped the waterfall. In so doing, he has left the meager and cramped world of the pagan behind. Here's a story that actually has a beginning. A God who created everything. Here's a story that actually has an ending. He's going to restore his world. And here's a story where the God who created the beginning and who will bring about the ending has just jumped into the middle and said, I'm here right now, and this changes everything. The end that you're waiting and waiting and waiting for has already started. I'm already fixing my world. No, I'm not just promising to fix my world. I've already conquered death in the person of my Son. And that's a down payment for every one of you. You see what Paul's done? He just took their little story of let's add another God, or let's have a fight about whether this is a God or not. And let's hope we can keep this one happy so it rains. And let's hope we can keep this one happy so we can get a prediction about whether I should sell my house or not. And oh dear, Aunt so-and-so is sick. She must have ticked one of them off. We better go take care of that. This little kind of maintenance system that was all in their heads. And Paul says, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to somehow connect. You're groping, you're reaching, and that's a wonderful thing. Now, let me tell you where that story fits in. There is a one God who created this whole thing and loves you and cares for you and is going to make it all right in the end. And he's here right now. That's jumping the waterfall. Two ways to respond when your story gets swallowed up by somebody else's. Paul's message prompted some people to sneer. Resurrection, absurd. Ridiculous. There's no such God. There's no such change. But others said, verse 32, we want to hear you again on this subject. Isn't that cool? Something triggered. You mean there's a bigger story? You mean there's something other than just grinding out this life? Hoping that fate or chance will somehow bring me to the top of the cycle instead of the bottom? You mean there is some, not just principle to the universe, but an actual being who cares and loves? Who started us? Who walks with us? Who finishes the journey with us? Who's here right now? We read in verse 34, some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus. Also a woman named Damaris and a number of others. Mission accomplished. Paul has leaped over the waterfall and fulfilled his purpose. There have been many who have said that this was not Paul's greatest day because the pagan system was too strong. I would beg to differ. If any one of us could go to the Supreme Court and make our case and have one of the people on the bench who wasn't a Christian become a Christian, I think we would say that was a good day. You see what Paul did? He met people who had a tiny and cramped story of their lives and their world. It lacked a beginning. It lacked an ending. Instead, it was all about living in a world where you won some and you lost some. The best you could do was hope to break even. And even then, there was no question. There was no answer to the question, why even bother? Paul didn't reject the good and the true parts of these insufficient stories. Instead, he gave the pagan story a real beginning and a real ending. And you and I have the same task. We live in a world that is increasingly like the world of Athens. Think about what this world tells you, tells your kids in school, tells you in every program you watch on TV. Think about what this world says about the beginning of all time and all matter and our own existence. Instead of a story that tells us that God, a loving God, created us, we are told that we are part of perhaps an endless universe. We have no meaning. We are simply stardust that just happened to come together. You know the whole deal. Which raises an interesting question. Why are we so worried about stuff? If the planet is simply on a collision course with getting blown up by the sun when it goes into its final death spiral, why are we so worried about keeping the planet going? You see, it's an inadequate story. People are running around and they're all passionate about this and they're passionate about that, and you better believe the way I do and you better not do this and so on. And yet when you dig down into it and you say, why? It's just a pagan world we live in now that doesn't have a beginning to its story. And guess what else? It doesn't have an end to its story. There's no real ending to the story. Oh, we're told every election cycle, it gets old after a while. And we're already hearing it. This is the most important election America's ever faced. I thought the last one was. And I remember 2 back, and that was the most important one. And I'll bet you somebody in 2020 is going to be saying, this is the most important election. Why? Why? Oh, because I'm all worked up in a lather right now. Oh, that's why it's important. That's what happens when you don't have a beginning and you don't have an ending to your story. God's given us a story that works a different way. God's story says, this is the most important moment you will ever face because right now, Jesus is right here. The same Jesus who helped create the world and who will judge it at the end is right here, right now, with all the life and power of God to take your situation and to take you over that waterfall, that obstacle. That's the message you and I have for this world. Try to understand, we don't have to go out and fight every kooky idea. We don't have to get all embroiled in the little petty debates of the moment. We've got a bigger job. We get to tell a bigger story. We get to make the human story life-sized, not cramped down to somebody's little picayune agenda full of half-truths and half-lies. We can say, yep, there are problems in the world. Oh, there are problems in my family. There are problems in my life. There are problems in my physical body. Yeah, there are things right now that are obstacles. Isn't it great to know that I'm not an accident? Isn't it great to know that you're not an accident? Isn't it great to know that, no, you weren't just born with a black mark on your face, that you're somehow cursed. God created us in His image, and He loves every single person regardless. And the same God, at the end of the day, when time is all done, He's going to restore His world. He doesn't make junk and He doesn't leave junk. He fixes things that other people break. But the best news is He's doing it right now. Now, my burden for you as followers of Jesus is that you would, through the power of God's Spirit, carry that bigger story in your head the way Paul did. As you look at your own problems and you look at your own circumstances, and as you interact with others in our community and maybe volunteering alongside some people, maybe just hanging out with your family or just raising your kids. Because if we don't, then the immediate problems and the immediate hysterias and craziness becomes the only story. And it's not the only story. It's not about that. It's really about, is there a God who cares? When I can't go up that waterfall, when I can't heal my physical body, when I can't fix this problem in a loved one's life, when I can't all by myself make my marriage perfect, when I can't do those things, I can either give up or I can say, I can't do this, but I know who can. Why do I know that? Because He created it all, and because He promised to fix it all, and because He's here right now. That's where faith comes in, see? There were people that day that heard Paul who said, I need that. This system we have here is just a cat chasing its tail. I need something that goes somewhere. That's what we have, folks. We jump the waterfall of the tiny, cramped stories of a godless world. And we bring that good news to others. You know, there's going to be somebody in your life, when they see you jump, they're going to say, I'd like to do that too. And they're going to find that the same God that made you created them to be able to take that leap of faith, a purposeful, directed, well-engineered leap, not just a leap into the void, but that leap of faith over that obstacle into the upper part of the river to go finish the job. Some of you need to have someone even stand with you today, because that leap just seems overwhelming for the thing you're facing right now. Well, let's just take time as we after we've received the table of the Lord, let's have some time to pray. And I'm going to just plant that in your heart right now, that yes, I can find the God who is the God of right now. He's not just the beginning God and the ending God, but He's the right now God. I can find Him right now. And for all of us, we're going to come to the table of the Lord, and when we do that and take the bread and the cup, we're celebrating the beginning, the God who is the God who made everything, and the God who brings eternal life to all who trust in Him through Jesus. But most of all, we're celebrating the right now of the God who stepped into our mess. So this is my body. This is my blood for you, to give you eternal life and forgiveness.